When you first open GraphPad, you'll notice along the top a series of switches. Those are for the individual modes. There's the sketch mode, which is used for doing really quick drawings and actually straightens lines and also closes gaps. We have the points mode, and that's used for creating a selection area and manipulating points. We have the lines mode, which is where we're going to do most of our detailed drawing, and we know that it actually does a good job of creating perfectly straight lines and then connecting those lines together. We have the arcs mode. Arcs mode is actually used for making corner arcs and for making circles. Circles can actually be resized, and we'll go into more detail. We have the dimensions, which is where we actually apply our dimensions, and you can see that it's very easy to create dimensions on our various different elements. Text mode is for creating rudimentary text. And the pan and zoom mode, which actually allows us to reposition our drawing. And we'll notice when we zoom out that we see the edges of the paper that we're going to be drawing on, etc. So, when you first start working with GraphPad, the best place to start is with lines mode. And what we'll notice when we create a line is that along the type and the control we see the length of the line that's been created, the angle, we see the type and all the information about that line. So if we actually create this point, or grab this point and actually draw a line south, we'll notice that we've got 8 feet 6 inches, 9 feet. We see it's actually snapping to a specific distance. That is actually determined by the scale. And so along the top we'll see what the scale of our drawing is. And so it's got a 6-inch snap. So each one of these fine grids is 6 inches apart. We have a width of 25 feet as the maximum width and a maximum height of 33 feet. We can manipulate how the scale works based upon these settings. So if we're completely far off and we need to do something that's in hundreds of feet, we can actually multiply it by 10 or multiply it by 100. We can set the scale, so this actually does it in a fairly coarse way. We'll notice down here in the lower right hand corner it actually shows for a large block it's 8 feet across. That makes our snap 8 inches across. And these are the number of divisions. So when we're working in feet and inches, we'll almost always want to work in units of 12 divisions. If we're working in a metric system, then it's going to be 10. Architects like to work with 8 divisions. And then our grid size. And our grid size is going to determine how easy it is, how precise we have to be. So we'll set this back to, so we have a 6-inch gap. As we increase either by zooming or the grid size, it becomes much easier to select a point or select on the grid. So we'll notice as I draw that it's precisely on the grid, and that's because of this grid size. So halfway distance between the grid size, it's actually going to look around for the point, and you'll notice that I was able to grab that point even though I was nowhere near it. Similarly, hopefully this will show up in the video, I'm way up here, but it actually says, okay, obviously I was trying to get that particular point. It's very important that these lines be connected because that's how we actually close the geometry. And the other thing we can demonstrate really quickly is that if we turn the IDs on, we can actually see what the elements are that we're creating. So in this little boxy area we've got 0.5 connected to 0.6 by line number 4. And for calculating areas and stuff like that, that's very important. It makes the geometry very clean. Continuing on with creating geometry in lines mode, since we have our snap set to where it's 6 inches, it's very easy to create walls. So we can easily create this partition. And now we get into how we can manipulate those lines. So if we want to manipulate a line, all we have to do is select it, and then we can drag that. In this case, we've got a partition with defined by 2 different lines, and we were easily able to drag that. Now, you'll notice that even though I'm moving about, that it's actually snapping to the snap angle. That's defined under points. And what's going to happen is that if we're moving a short distance, it's very squirrely, right? So you can see we can move it around. but as we move further away, the angle gets more precise, and we see it's very easy to move a very long distance. But as we get close to where we started our move, it's more difficult. So that brings out a very important point in that when we're trying to define a very precise geometry, it's easy to offset everything's long distance and then move it into position rather than trying to move it a very short distance. So that's very important when we're creating, say for example, we have a long wall and we have a bump out. To do that, what you do is you draw the larger dimensions and you bring that spacing out quite a bit. And now in order to get, say for example, this was only a 1 inch gap or a 1 inch extension, if we grab that line, we can now move it in to where it's a very small distance and still retain our accuracy. And we can zoom in, we can actually see that. But if we tried to actually create those real small lines, that's going to be very difficult. So that's how you create really precise drawings using this tool, is to make it kind of big and then shrink it to where it's precisely where you need it to be. Another important feature is to be able to create points at the intersection of two lines. So we're going to show an example of that. And so we'll start by creating a couple of lines. And now if we select a line and we hit type, we'll notice there's a new type called a guideline. And a guideline is just infinitely long. We can move that guideline, and to select it, or to create a point at the intersection of two lines, in this case a regular line and a guideline, we select the two lines, we hit points, and now we'll notice that something very interesting took place. If we go back, we see that we had line 3 connected to points 2 and 3, but afterwards line 3 is gone, and we now have lines 10 and 11 which are connected by points, or which connect points 2, 6, and 3. So to fill out this geometry, all we would have to do is to, in lines mode, select line 1, we have line 7 selected still, hit points, it broke that line, and now go back to lines mode, delete this one line, select point 7, notice I wasn't quite close enough, select point 7 which is highlighted, select point 8, and then it creates line 19, and now we can select the lines around our perimeter. You'll notice that we see arrows that show the direction of the lines. You see this is a closed geometry. It automatically brings up our area tool, so we can calculate area, we can calculate perimeter. We can fill this area with color. We can select the color and we can see the color showing up. And we also have brightness and transparency. So select the color we want and we fill that geometry. Switch gears and talk about points mode. Points is where we manipulate most of our entities, so we'll create something that we can work with here real quick. So it'll just be a couple of lines, a couple of marks. And now in points mode, we can grab an entity and drag it along. So in this case, we grab a little library and we'll grab an electrical symbol. And so we can grab it, we can move it along. Entities that have purple handles have menus, so if you press on this, you'll see a menu associated with that. We'll drop that for right now. Take this to the side. Most of the time what we'll do, however, is we'll manipulate items with a selection area. So what we'll do is, to create a selection area, is you touch a point of the screen where there's no entities and you drag, you get a light gray area. Anything within that area will be active, by default will be active, and you'll see it turn orange. So we've got a lot of orange points. We have these black points which are calculated points, so they can't be manipulated directly. Now the selection area itself is quite dynamic, so you can turn everything off, turn everything on, or you can actually turn individual items on and off. And so in this case, we now just have two active items. We have this nice big selection area to manipulate things with, so we don't have to be right on top of our geometry. We can actually select from the side, and then we can move. Now, anything that's active is being compared to anything that's inactive, and it's trying to align. And you'll see these purple, magenta guidelines. And when you release, what happens is it's going to try and line up. So you saw everything tried to snap into alignment. So this is now a perfectly horizontal line. This is a perfectly vertical line. So we can see a better example of that. We can move this around. You see the guidelines, and now we see the snap. So this entails all entities which are inside of that. A icon is actually, we turn the points on, we'll see that actually the icons have points associated with them. They're hidden, but they are used for alignment. So let's turn that back off because they're kind of irritating. But now if we want to take this icon and we want to put it right on top of that line, we see the guideline, we release and it snaps into position. Geometry, which is lines, arcs, and curves, can be grouped into a single entity or group by creating a selection area around all the selectable items, pressing and holding, and we get our copy group image menu. Right, so we can turn it into a group, and now we can manipulate it all as a group. Right, so if we created a line and we go to points mode, we just grab the center of the group, all of these points are still active, and they're going to try and line up with any inactive points, which is the line, and it will snap into position. So this is extremely powerful. Now, we saw it briefly. I'm going to clear everything out so I can show it a little bit better. But when we create that selection area, it's going to fill in our geometry, and we'll turn the transparency off. Nice blue square. Okay, go to points mode. We're going to select this and drag it over. If we press and hold, we'll see that we've got a create object and create image. So if we press on the create object, whatever the active library is, we'll try and dump it in there. We don't actually want to do that in this case because that's a library that came with the product. So we'll just create a test library. Actually, we'll call it test 1 because I think I've got another test library out there. We'll give this a name. And we save. And now that new library becomes active, and we see our entity. So we can just touch it and drop it in there. Now I sort of glossed over it. Purple lines are the purple point, center point, will actually give you the menu. So you can get some information about this entity, so we can actually change its color. We can change its size here. We can have settable parameters. We can turn points off and rotate off and resizable points off, and we'll see what that looks like when we update. We don't see the points anymore. We just see the center. So it's a little less data to look at all the time. It won't rotate anymore, but that shows this rotation handle on this other entity. The rotation, just like everything else, snaps based upon the degree, so we can turn it off and we can rotate it freely. We can set it to 30 and we'll snap 30-degree increments. Or we can set it to 45, and we can also resize the entity. Okay? Now, in addition to that, we also have the ability to create an image. So we'll take the same item, we'll select it, and now we'll create an image. The difference between an image and geometry is that images stack. So if we put two images on top of each other, we'll notice that lines are, it's an image, it's stacked on top of it, so you see the top image and not the bottom image wherever they cover. Geometry, however, is plotted in sequence. So basically, we plot all of the shaded areas, plot all of the lines. There's a certain sequence, so we don't get the visual effect that we're looking for in a lot of cases. But we don't get the layering effect. It's more accurate for CAD work, but not necessarily for creating an icon or something like that. And that's about 20 minutes worth of tutorial, so I'd like to cut it off at this point. But I'll be creating more tutorials in the future, and I hope these help people out. Thank you very much.